good evening, and welcome to Inside the Rookery, Season 9. It says Episode 1 up there, but I don't think that's right. I think we're not on Episode 1. Yeah, Episode 3, I think. So that's clearly a typo that I made when I was setting up this episode. We are welcoming Tanya Floaker today to talk about their new game Mum Chums, which as of half an hour ago is fully overfunded on Kickstarter. Hooray! Yay! We're all really happy for you. So congratulations and welcome to the stream. So we're going to be talking about keeping it real, building RPGs about real life, and hopefully we will get in quite a lot to Mum Chums because we're really interested to hear about it, hear about your inspirations and yeah, what kind of games you can play with it. So welcome to the stream. As always, we've got loads of questions pre-submitted on our Discord server by patrons and our community. But if you have any questions for Tanya or for me and Andy, as always, pop them in the chat and I will bring them up on the screen. You can check out Tanya's links and games here. And before we get into the questions, I'll just pass over to you, Tanya, to say hi, tell us a bit about yourself and who you are, where you come from, etc.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you so much for having me on. It's wonderful to be here. Me. So I'm Tanya. I'm a mum. I'm also a game designer. I'm also a pupil support assistant at a special needs school. And what else do I do? I do lots of other things as well. So that's basically the reason you've got me here, I think, is mainly the game design. So I've been designing games now, publishing games now for about 4 or 5 years. I've been involved with doing fanzines for some local games, especially Slay Industries. I've done club zines for different clubs I've been involved in, most recently the Edinburgh Indie Gamers, which me and a whole bunch of other people help organise. And I've also put out my own games. So I think we'll go into a bit of detail about some of those and the sort of like the more real aspects of them and the more sort of fictional aspects of them. And I also want to shout out a whole bunch of other games. I'm sure the audience have their own ideas as well, and I'd like to hear their ideas of games that have sort of realist angles and elements to them. So
Yeah, absolutely. As always, pop it in your comments, and we're here at the Rookery, we're always looking for recommendations. So if there's anything you've played that particularly, even if it's not designed to be realist, but you've used it to play a realist game, please do pop it in the chat and we'll bring it up. Right, we will get into the questions. So first up, Roderick asks, I'm not going to say yo in like multiple O's, Roderick. I almost deleted that, but I thought no, I don't. I'm not into censorship. In terms of keeping it real, how did you end up writing and publishing your first games?
Oh yeah, so I guess what had happened in the past is I'd been writing my games for myself and writing them for friends and playing games just day to day. And then it was basically across the pandemic, when lockdown had happened very early on, a friend of mine passed away, and we talked about publishing together at some point, and it kind of put a fire under me a little bit. I had a background in zine distribution anyway, and I'd been doing some fanzines and club zines, as I mentioned, and so I'd also been involved for quite some time, taking part and helping just steer and help along the every November the International Games Design Month, Nagadeemon. And so I took some of the ideas that I'd been working on and thought about publishing them. And then at the same time, my friend Bruce had posted in our club Discord asking like if someone was wanting to run a game set in the sort of TV series The Prisoner, what system, what game would you use for that? So we had a bit of a discussion, and none of the options really hit home. There was a Prisoner release for GURPS. There was a sort of powered by the apocalypse game called Prisoners of the Village. Didn't really work for my friend. And so I sat down. It was November was just coming round, and so I spent the month in it's sort of like a month-long game design challenge to try and finish a game in a month. And I finished a game called Be Seeing You, and I decided I'd publish it. And then I thought to myself, well, I've actually got a game that my friend who passed had some involvement with. I'd like to polish that up and publish it, but it would be quite a large affair. It's a bigger game. And I'm wise enough, old enough and wise enough to know that you can't just go to Kickstarter and go, hey, I've got my big magnum opus, amazing role play game. Trust me, it's going to be really good. Can you give me tens of thousands of pounds to just do that with? So I realized, well, what I should do is dust off a whole bunch of the other role play games that I've designed. And while I was doing that, obviously, I've been designing more, and those games have been slowly coming out, and I've been testing out different skills that I knew that I needed to pick up. So I'd never worked with artists before on a publication of this sort of publications of this scale. So I've started working with artists more regularly and getting that kind of collaborative process up and running. And on this project, it's the first time I'm not doing the layout.
I saw that on the Kickstarter. Yeah,
So it's sort of like a whole new. I thought it'd be quite similar to working with an artist directly, and I'm finding it's another. There's other skill sets and other little things that I should change in my workflow to make it a little easier. And so I'm learning those skills in a nice smaller project, so that when I scale up, I'll be able to say, I've done this in a different project under a different setting. I've done it a couple of times now, and I've ironed out all the sort of the major problems that I could have with that, all the sort of beginners problems have been learned. I think I'm ready to do something bigger.
and I've talked quite a lot on multiple streams because it's come up a few times, and I feel quite passionately about it, about the concept of like the Scandinavian spiel, so games with rules, and like Leka, which is more like free play. And like my earliest role playing experiences were those like free playing in the playground. So like us all taking on characters from pop culture, from like Star Wars, like Robin Hood, even things that we liked. And just kind of like running with it and making up our own internal rule. There weren't really very many rules. And they were always like time bound by the fact that playtime was like 20 minutes long. So I wonder, like, as a pupil support assistant, how do you get inspiration from like that other part of your work? Like, how does that feed into you as an artist?
Well, I guess everything that I'm like, anything that I'm involved with is feeding into my worldview on some level. And so when I'm thinking about like being a parent, that feeds into my worldview in terms of how I'm going to see interactions between people. And same as a pupil support assistant, that sort of professional side of it, I'm seeing relate the kids and how they relate from a different angle. Because the amount of times you hear the phrase like how us sort of learners at school isn't how they seem to appear at home, and that can be for the better, the worse, or in a neutral, just in a different different angle. It's because all of us do that. It's a matter of our identity shifting based on the setting we're in and how we're perceived. Like to my child, my youngest child, I'm mum, and so that's got a whole weight and connotation and whole sort of stuff going on around it. And if someone sees me out with my kid, they're going to see me being a parent, and they're going to have that sort of placed onto me. If they see me in a sort of school context and I'm out with learners on a trip or something outside the school, they're going to see me in that context and think of me in a certain way, and they're going to relate to me in a way, and I'm going to relate to the world in a certain way because I'm in a professional environment. If I'm at a big like concert and I'm just jumping about and having a great time, that's a whole nother sort of set of relations and identities that people are seeing and relating to. So I kind of feel like, is that answering your question?
Yeah. There's no right answer to that question. It's like it's an interesting answer, because what I think sort of that really strikes a chord with me about identity, and for like neurodivergent people or people with long-term mental or physical disabilities, you do like mask a lot in terms of sometimes just physically pretending that you're weller than you are because you need to get things done and you need to do stuff. So it's quite, I've never really thought about it in such a role-playing way in terms of my so I work, for a bank. In my day job, I've been on parent councils I work with, but then I've also done burlesque classes, and a lot of those cultures, like, they do clash with each other. And I've been questioned in the past, like, but you're, Lindsay, you run a women's network and you're like a feminist, so how does that gel with you doing burlesque classes? And I'm like, well, for me, it's really simple. It's about reclaiming like a positive relationship with my body that went through so much when I was pregnant, that has been asked for so much by other people, that this is me taking something for myself. But I think we all need to come to terms with those different identities in our own way. That's what's worked for me. But it'll be different things that work for other people.
Yeah.
I guess that must be the same for Andy. I'm pointing the wrong way. Like, being a teacher, you've got quite a distinct professional identity that's different.
Yeah.
But has to be morally consistent with your external identities.
Yeah, exactly. It is tricky, and it can be like I can give you a very light-hearted example of that. As a probationary teacher, so my first year teaching, I had like 4 friends who were at other nearby secondary schools, and we would quite often go on a Friday after work and just go to kind of a pub nearby in Bruntsfield and just have a couple of pints, not get up to anything too inappropriate. But one day it was really hot, and we decided, we'll get a takeaway and we'll just sit in the park. And then we just, everywhere we went, we sat down, and there was pupils from one or other's classes nearby. And eventually we're just like, we just can't do this anymore. We just can't drink in public. Right? We weren't doing anything wrong. We were having literally a couple of beers on a Friday afternoon.
Did you say a Friday lunchtime? So,
afternoon, after school.
So for other people, but also for people that don't know, on Friday in Edinburgh, schools shut at lunchtime. So you're not going back to school for the afternoon session after
and actually, this was at like about 4:30 as well.
Yeah,
so this was later in the day.
Just like no day drinking for you, Andy.
Yeah. But there was a real sense of self-consciousness.
Interesting.
And another similar one was when when I was with you in a supermarket, and we encountered a friend of yours and his daughter who I taught.
Yeah.
And
that was awkward.
It was funny
because turtle.
Because teenagers generally, when they're older or when they're younger, they don't mind seeing the teachers out and about. But in the middle, they don't like it because they I guess the same thing, right? They have how they're seen in class and how they're seen when they're out with their friends or out with their parents, and they don't want to be shoved into that different category in that moment. But I could see on this kid's face the warring combination between like wanting to just pretend I wasn't there and just ignore my presence, but massive curiosity as to who I was with that was not my wife, and I was not her husband. And you could see she was like, what's going on? There's a story here. Is there a scandal here? What is it?
Yeah,
but at the same time,
funny.
The other half of her was like, yeah, but I'm going to play it cool and act.
Yeah, I don't care. It was funny because also, like, I can't remember who the person from work was, but it doesn't matter. You can tell me after. We don't need to out them on the street. But like me having this is Andy. Oh, not my Andy, because obviously my husband's also called Andy. This is like the other Andy. So yeah.
And then me having to go, but of course we met at parents' evening when.
Yeah.
It was a very.
Anyway, let's get back to Mum Chums and your work, Tanya. So Martine asked, many of us play RPGs to escape reality. So why play in the real world rather than a fantasy? So let's talk about this, and then if you can interweave like what Mum Chums is and some of the mechanics towards the end of it would be amazing.
Yeah, so I would say that if you're playing something purely for escapist fiction, then you're maybe not going to be interested in something set in the real world. That's fair. Okay, we all like different games and different settings, but the reason why I enjoy games that are set within the real world is because there's a something to explore there. I feel like even when we're playing in a fantasy world, we're maybe exploring real emotions or real dilemmas or something that feels like it has real drama or pathos or some sort of real connection to us. And so I don't see a difference to setting it in a fictional world or the real world in terms of situations can be presented that are enjoyable to play through. It's a bit like why do we enjoy watching documentaries? Why do we enjoy watching kitchen sink dramas or slice of life shows? Why is reality TV taken off and is ubiquitous now? And compared with like that, they sit alongside fictional shows of more fantastic nature. Okay, so I feel like it's the same in a role play game. So if I'm thinking about Mum Chums, what's compelling about playing the game? And I think there's a few different sort of mechanical things going on that make it fun and enjoyable and a sort of like engaging experience. First one is there's relationships at play, and it's a character-focused game. It's a character-focused sort of like real life situation when you're a mum and you're trying to sort of, your kids are just about to start school for the first time, and you're trying to work with other parents and with the school and with your figure out where your kid is and figure out how they relate to other kids and help guide them through all this. It's an emotional time, and so that has a level of sort of simulation within the sort of game that I've designed, in that you create two webs of relationships. The first is you have your adult character, and so does every other player around the table, and you create a relationship with the person to your left and to your right. You get to select the person to your left and say for me to you, Lindsay, I was saying, I'd say our relationship is that I know you mentioned during character creation you've got a pet dog. Okay, I'm out of work. I'm a full-time mum, but I'm needing to make some ends meet. So maybe I've been doing some dog walking, and I seen your advert in the local newsagent, and that's how we met. That's our relationship. So we know each other as sort of like casual contacts. Occasionally, if you're going away on holiday or you've got something on, you'll contact me, and that's how we know each other. And then you talk
and I do the same for Andy. So for Andy is the big brother of a girl I went to school with, and coincidentally we have ended up with our children being the same age and at the same school, and we've reconnected in adulthood.
Yeah. And then
Andy, you need to do Tanya now.
I was so busy looking at the chat, I was only half listening. I'm sorry. Yeah. I just, when you said big brother, because I am a big brother, so there are a lot of people that I coincidentally do know, who also are sort of friends with my sister. I don't know what would be another.
Yeah, so you need to just work out how you know Tanya.
Yeah.
By the way, if you weren't listening because you were looking at the chat, Tanya is a full-time mum who's seen my advert for.
I did that. I just wasn't expecting to be put on the spot. Yeah. I should have known. You always do this to me. Well, let's keep it. Let's keep it games related then. Like one of the sort of things I do to kind of socialize is sort of play board games
Mhm.
at a local board game club. And I've seen you playing games there before, and have lent you a copy of Dark Deeds for you to
Dark Deeds.
Dark Deeds for you to, and we've started like swapping as well as playing board games, but like swapping games with each other. And things like that.
Okay, so we're gaming buds. I know you think that there we go. So we've got our relationships, okay, but alongside our relationships, that's sort of like a sort of a circular relationship map. Now, if we have more people playing, there'd be someone opposite who we have no connection with.
Yeah,
Okay,
of
or
course.
several
Yeah.
people opposite. And then along with that, we'll have our child who's about to start school. And that child will have two relationships going on randomly with one or two other children. And those, instead of going in a circle, those are randomly determined.
Nice.
So they weave across the different players. So they have like one sort of like relationship that's happening, which is nourishing in some way for your kid, and one that's a challenge for your kid. And so once you've got all those down as well, we'll explore what those are during play. We've determined our relationships as adults, but we don't know what the kids' relationships are until we sort of see them play out. And so this leaves a sort of like, this is like very much like in real life. I explained this to another games designer, and they turned around and their eyes sort of sparked, and they were like, this is so real. This happened to me. I'm a dad, and my kid formed this best friend with this other kid, and it is someone that I just that person had been like a bully at my school, and now we had to like make this whole sort of thing work, and we actually reconciled about what was happening in that time period in our youth, but then my other kid made a friend with someone else. And we had no connection, and we had to figure out how things work. But the other two parents knew each other, and I didn't know them. And so that sort of the realism of that relationship and how that sort of plays into a game setting into us playing. Along with that, I'd say like I mentioned, that your kids have got these sorts of challenging relationships and these nourishing relationships, and you're trying to find it, like these are revealed to you through play. You play your adult character, but all other players are playing your child, and you're playing the other people's children, sort of collectively. So the two of you can suggest what my child does, and I can maybe suggest something to you, but you two have final say. And that's that sort of unpredictability of what your kids get up to and what exactly is going to be thrown at you, because you might have the best plan in the world about, like, we're going to go on this event, it's going to be really lovely, my kids going to have a great time, we're going to go, like, we're going to the museum today and they're going to love it. And then you get there and they're having like a tantrum, or they're like they're overwhelmed and can't, or they're just bored or something, and you've got to sort of like, or you run into another kid and they're having this sort of like intense relationship. They're like really, really wanting to play hard together, and they're running about and they're getting more and more excited and more wild. And you're like, okay, how do I handle this? And what am I seeing here, and how am I reacting to it? And as an adult, you'll also have your own burdens as a character. You'll have picked a burden that you're sort of handling, or you've asked other players to select one, and these things are things that you're going to have to work around when you're parenting. So these moments of sort of like real life drama, or real life sort of like, I don't like to call it conflict per se, but real life moments where you're having to figure things out, make for great gameplay. They're an amazing to sort of explore at the games table together.
It sounds as well like that's brilliant training for being a GM, because the process you're describing there of sort of those different kind of like overlapping relationship maps. Like if I'm doing world building in like a sort of sandboxy, area, which is something I do quite a lot of in terms of games writing. Like that's essentially what I'm doing, except it's all having to come out of me and occasionally conversations with Andy and Lindsay. But in both getting everybody to essentially create the sandbox and also play in the sandbox, but with different levels of agency, that seems like for anyone who I have quite a lot of conversations with people who've only ever been players. And have like I'm quite lucky to have generally a forever GM in the shape of Andy Law, and a lot of people are nervous to start GMing because it feels like a lot of responsibility. And this sounds like this would be a wonderful way to dip your toe in and get that kind of experience of world building and creating and playing and the collaborative side of it. And I think that sounds fantastic. I think it's really interesting.
Because I'm always like, but how would I know? How would I know what things should be? And I guess you wouldn't, you don't know. That's kind of the point. You're just creating, and you're creating alongside other people. So I get really obsessed with that question. If I was to be a GM, but I feel like I'm making really arbitrary decisions. Like, why are they the right ones? But they're just decisions.
And I think GM-less games, a lot of the time, are really a good way to sort of soft start GMing. Not universally, but most of them are pretty good at being very clear about where your bounds of creation are. What you're when and where you can place something into the sort of collective narrative. And I think that's a really good way of introducing that's what a GM does just off their own back most of the time in a more trad game. And so if you get that sort of going a little bit, I think you're right, Andy. It's a good way to just sort of build up and then get running.
Yeah,
and
realize it's fun. It's not. It may seem daunting before you do it. Once you do it, it's a laugh. It's fun. Yeah.
And when you were talking about burdens and things, I was kind of considering would you encourage people to pick ones that were different to their own? Would you encourage what kind of rules were around that? But actually, Mark in the chat has asked a question that's broader. That's probably kind of where I was getting to. So Mark said, could you talk a bit about what safety tools you prefer to use for this kind of real life game? They would seem to be particularly important.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing earth shattering that I'm doing with this. If you're familiar with the sort of different, I like to call it conversation tools or conversation mechanics, because the notion of this came out of a conversation I had recently with other designers. The idea of safety is a good sort of starting point. But if you think of it in terms of maybe a few years ago now, maybe 5-6 years ago, there was a lot of talk about trigger warnings. And now we've sort of talked more about just this will contain such content or content notice. And the reason for that change isn't that we've changed functionally what we're doing, but it's just to sort of more acknowledge that it's a broader category, and we want to be a bit more we want to shape the conversation while still giving that sort of warning to people who have a full trigger response to sort of content, but also people who might just not want to engage with it on a sort of on a personal level for any reason. So I kind of feel like the sort of idea of safety tools, we're not always making something safe. We're more talking about this is how the conversation will be guided and how we're sort of agreeing in a meta level beforehand. So to that end, in Mum Chums, rather than be some of my other games, I'm here are the sort of safety tools I'm using. Mum Chums, I've been more conversational about it. But I do drop in lines and veils, the same as other games, but in a more sort of conversationally sort of orientated way. So a line is something that we agree not to have in the game at all, and a veil is something we'll have fade into the background or not focus on, things happening off screen. Also talk about the types of content in advance that a game about parenting could bring up, and sort of bring that into the mix. Also have a frank discussion about the sort of the concept of the game, the tone, that's sort of like where the game's going to sit. The game isn't a fantasy game, it's very real, and we're not trying to push us hard into melodrama. So we're not going for if we don't have to go jumping into conflict, we don't have to
or peril, yeah.
We don't have to, and we don't have to crank it up so it's the greatest tragedy, or we just have to sort of follow the flow of how we're feeling, what would happen, what feels real, what feels emotionally real to the situation, because it is still a fiction. Like a drama we watch on the television could feel very real, but it could be made out of whole cloth. And that's what we're doing. We're making a story out of whole cloth, but it could have a sort of an emotional intelligence to it that we're going to imbue it with. So that's it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, culturally speaking, parents are often, especially I would say mums, so see, this is a stereotype about mums, that they're very judgy, and that they're very, like, judgy of each other. Like, you see that stereotype written, played out all the time. I feel like if I was playing, I would kind of want that to be a conversation that was had, that, you know, say you do pick a burden that is your own, you know, it isn't your life that you're playing, you know, it's a light-hearted, kind of not in-depth look at it. But there's still that element of, you could be drawing on your own parenting style if you are a parent, and people round the table could be judging you for it. Do you think that fear is? Do you think that's a very like mum fear that I have, that people would judge me?
I think when we're for myself, when I'm parenting, and something is going wrong. There's something gone awry, and there's other parents around. I think that it can the self-critical eye can turn, and there are other people who are judgy, but there are also other people who offer just the right
knowing
words.
Look, like, that's what I always try to do now as a parent of older young people. If I see someone with younger kids, you know, in the supermarket or out and about, you just try and give them eye contact and sort of nod and smile and be like, I know, gosh, it's a bit of a nightmare. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Try and get through. And so I kind of feel like if you want to explore something from your own parenting, if somebody did, I've definitely done that while playtesting, throwing in something that's happened to me or an experience I've had, and I've usually found it doesn't feel like a space where we're being judged. I do have that sort of like X card style mechanic written in but not just for like stop, remove, no discussion, but also that sort of pause. Maybe we want to talk out something, maybe remove something or add something, or just move on quickly. But I also have, for when the game ends, and this is one part of a sort of safety tools, conversation tools that often gets neglected, is having a sort of de-rolling and debriefing section. So basically, I suggest take a minute to break, stretch your legs, get a few breaths away from the table, grab some snacks, come back together, introduce yourself as you, the person, and you were playing the character. And then from that, discussing where we felt that character's inner monologue was coming from and what we seen from the others and what we were taking from it. And using that to sort of take a step away from the characters and away from the drama we've just played through. And to also celebrate the game we've just had and to enjoy it. And then have a round of sort of stars and wishes. So that's sort of like going round and picking out a moment that you really loved and just sort of giving that sort of like a cheer to that moment. And then picking out the moments that you feel either didn't work for you or you wish had happened but didn't fit in, or you might change if you were playing again. And that gives, ending on that note, sounds maybe counterintuitive. Why would you end the game on that down note? But it takes a step, it helps you step away
Yeah.
You have the build up, you have of sort of like even talking about it removed, but then you get to let go of it and let it back down. So I think that's quite important.
That'll help with managing that bleed, won't it? That'll help with
Yeah, because it could be really intense. So we've had, Andy Leask and I have been role playing together for like way too long, and we've had some like really intense experiences in vampire. We've had children in games, not together. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe we have. I can't remember. But we've had we've had childer because we were playing vampires. We've had lots of really intense experiences, parenting arguments about one of those children over the years, and they were super intense, but they were like in the fantasy world, whereas doing it in a real life world could be in some ways even more intense. So it is really important to have that ability to like separate yourself. And Benjamin's got a comment which came in a while ago, and I think it's about the question, which was about why would you want to do things in reality. Another reason you might want to is the way in which it can trigger really intense bleed. So I can see, as I've said, how that would happen. Not something everyone wants, but it can be really good to experience those very intense emotions within the safety of play.
Yeah, and bleed, like I've had a long and an interesting relationship when the concept of bleed was sort of brought into consciousness by the Nordic LARP community. That was such a sort of like it's got a name moment for me, because I used to do, as a teen, I used to sneak off to Vampire the Masquerade LARPs. Other kids are sneaking off to the pub, and I'm off to my LARP.
And like, Mum, I'm going to Bedfordshire for a weekend. To do what, Lindsay? Well, I am pretending to be an elf. Like, I can't believe my mum and dad just were like, yeah, sure, crack on. It must have been a very self-determined teenager.
I used to just on a Sunday afternoon, I'd be like, I'm off out to see friends. And then what that entailed was me going down to the Perth train station, my hometown of Perth, getting into a random goth's car, hurtling to Livingston, so to another town, and then going into a pub there, playing a LARP until the late evening, and then getting hurled all the way back, and then going home and being like, oh, I'm back with my friends.
That was my Sunday night, like getting a bus from Forfar to Dundee to the bus station, walking down to a pub underage, I might add. I didn't, it wasn't like I was drinking. A random goth's car to St Andrews,
So I guess from that age, on topic of it, was on bleed. It's like I was very focused on this idea of like trying to hit those moments where what we would now call bleed was occurring. And I saw that, like, I was very young at the time, and I saw that as being like, these are the moments of role play games.
Peak role play,
like amazing. And it's like, but it could be quite. There was no there was no sort of like workshopping your character in and then de-rolling after, and so that could be quite intense and could sit with you for quite a time.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought when I was younger that was the point. That's what you're aiming for, surely. And now I'm like,
not so sure. Yeah, I did work through a lot of teenage trauma in role playing. Like I found the other day my 6th year diary, and it's just full of like really emo poems that I wrote in character. I'll have to show them. I'm not going to show them to Andy, the English teacher, but they're like, it's hilarious to read it back. But I also I have really vivid dreams, and I still to this day dream like in character. Last week, in fact, I had a dream that a greater demon of Slaanesh was like marching about, which was pretty terrifying. So I feel like I'm quite lucky to have that, because in those dreams I'm fully experiencing like life as Amenawith the elf, but then I wake up and I'm like, oh well, that was just a dream, that was great. Whereas when you're a teenager and you experience that kind of bleed, it can become a little bit like messy.
And I think emotions are messy as a teen anyway, so I think I've got a lot of time and compassion for the younger self, just basically being like, every teen was being messy with their emotions, and
yeah, for sure.
That's what is happening. But yeah, I kind of felt like once that got theorized and people have been talking about bleed in games and how it affects them, and even just thinking back to the sort of like up until about 2009, 2010, sort of the late 90s until that sort of like 2010, there was this sort of period of like games with sort of a more emotional maturity becoming more popular and being circulated more readily. And early on, we didn't have like the discussion about safety mechanics. That's where a lot of it came out, from those games being quite emotionally intense and folks not knowing how to engage with it. So I kind of feel like things are always sort of being developed in that sort of sense, and these sorts of tools of how we relate and converse at the table have been improving. So yeah.
The de-rolling point makes a lot of sense, the sort of reinforcement of the fictional aspect of the game for this reality-focused kind of game. I'm pretty sure I'm not an elven wizard or whatever. I'm not so sure. So not quite necessary. No, it is necessary for your fantasy universe. I am indeed a parent of young children.
Are you not so
Benjamin.
sure that Mark is not an elven wizard, or that you're not an elven wizard?
Me, I mean, I'm not so sure. I'm not. We did used to drive our brains like we stole them. We really did. It's very rare that we have 3 Scottish accents on the show. Yeah. So your Scottish accent's getting some love, Tanya. Question: I often fear to get too much into what is really just my own prejudice and cliche when I'm doing real life RPG. Any advice on how to check that? Especially when it comes to the thing you fear or the darker side of society or people. I feel like it's always too easy to fall back to simplistic cliche.
Okay. Well, you're not alone at the table, is the first thing. And I guess having that sort of, having a pace and a set and a trust in both the other players that are there with you. Like someone might, for Mum Chums at least, there's a lot of the sort of like way in which it's positioned and phrased is to make it you in conversation with other players present. And the game tools, the game itself doesn't have mechanics which are like roll this dice and do this thing, and it doesn't have randomizers, but it does have a set of 8 phrases that anyone can use at any time during a scene to help guide it. So phrases can be like, what's going on internally for you? What's going on elsewhere? Things about like closing down your emotions or having sort of an emotional outburst. And also like, is this where this other character appears, or is this where the scene ends, as questions to ask. So that can help everybody get the tone right together. And also at the start and at the beginning of the game, I mentioned there's a discussion about tone. There's a discussion about the concept for the game. So at that point, you can raise up, oh, maybe I'm worried about, I might get cliched about something, or how are we going to handle it if this game veers into farce or into comedy? Are we going to just go with it and just say that's how our game went that night and maybe like just enjoy the ride? Or are we going to say, oh, maybe if one of us feels that way, we can call a little break time? Also sort of wrote in different points in the game where you check in if you want to take a break.
Yeah. And can we talk about the mug? Because at the Rookery, we absolutely love, and at Lawhammer, we love a mini game, we love a mechanic, we've done flashbacks, flash forward, like we do all sorts of stuff. And when I read about the mug, I was like, I love this.
Yeah, so this is
tell us about the mug.
Yeah, so couple of scenes are, you're having your main scene and it's unfolding. And on the table at the start of the game, you place a mug just to sit there. It sits there the whole time. Anytime a player can reach over and pick up the mug. And what this indicates is that we should cut play, put it on pause, and the scene cuts to the future where the person who's picked up the mug is talking to someone who we can't see. It's someone not involved in any other way with the game in character. And they get to monologue at them about what
I
was
love it so much.
the scene that they just cut away from. This is actually taken from another game called Inspectors, which uses it in the sense of it's sort of like a modern day Ghostbusters on reality TV. And when they do it, it's called a confessional scene. And you cut to the confessional sofa in the future where they're talking about the scene that they've just cut from. For this year, cuppa scene, because you're having a cuppa with your pal and you're talking about maybe what was going on inside for you, you're giving your inner monologue, or you're commenting on what happened, or talking about what's going to happen next, or what was happening elsewhere, or some other facts surrounding the whole situation. Once you've had that monologue, you put the cup back down, cut back, and play continues. So that sort of notion of an example of how this went down. One of the games I played recently, this is so beautiful, is that there were two mums, and one of them had been in a bit of a bad housing situation, and they'd been stuck in it, and a family member died, and then they were dealing with, but then they were being moved into a council house, sort of like social housing, and so they were getting back out of that sort of. But there was a bad thing going on and a good thing going on in life, and they didn't have anyone to help move house apart from this one other character who was available. And the other character was dealing with serious illness, or the only illness. And so, like, they played through a little bit of the scene, and the character, the mum with the illness, had sort of like was being apologetic for not being able to carry as much as they would have liked to help. Another mum was like, "It's okay, I'm just getting on with it." And the one with the illness picked up the mug and was like, "I don't know. She must have thought She must have thought I was just so useless. I just turned up. I was the only person that turned up, and then I couldn't really carry anything. I dropped one of the boxes. It was just an absolute mess. I feel terrible. I'd have been better not turning up at all." And it had this sort of like real what was going on internally for their character, and we were all like, "Damn, okay." And then put the mug down, and then the character who was doing the house move picked up the mug, like immediately. The mug went down and immediately picked up and said, I can't believe how she turned up for me. Like, I know she's going through a lot at the moment, and she turned up. She's the only one to turn up that day, and I know other people couldn't make it, but she turned up and she helped as much as she could. She put in a ton of effort, and it absolutely leaves me in awe. I'm absolutely awestruck. I admire her so much. I have so much admiration for it. And honestly, when we put the mug down at the table, like the rest of the scene, when we cut back, carried on for another 30 seconds or so of small, "Oh, let me help you with that" kind of thing. And then it was done, and everyone at the table was just sat there. Like, we knew that was like such a beautiful moment. And yeah, getting to see that part of the character, like you mentioned, flashbacks are used quite commonly now. There was a time when those weren't so common, and they're an excellent tool. But this sort of flashing forward to comment and then
monologue gets really interesting. I really like it. I'm going to be telling other Andy Law about it, because I think it's a really interesting idea and a tool to explore, to allow, especially. Sorry, Andy, on you go.
Well, I was just going to say, and it's a format structure that people are very familiar with now because of confessionals and reality TV and stuff like that. But you, as soon as you started describing, I'm like, it's one of those, like, it's a really good idea because I'd never thought of it. But as soon as you said it, I'm like, that's really obvious. Why had I never thought of that?
So, yeah.
And like Jared Sorensen, who wrote Inspectors, like, I have no idea why other games, it's been 10, 15 years since that game came out, at least. I don't know why I haven't seen other games use that bit of game tech, because I think it's an absolutely beautiful scene framing mechanic. And I've used it in other games. I've just dropped it in over the years, like into like other games I'm playing, and just said to players, like, we're going to do this tonight as part of it. And
I also feel like, because we stream a game, which is, quite different from just playing it yourself, and quite often what I feel you miss in a streamed game especially is the audience being able to understand like the internal struggle dialogue that your character's going through, that often, because we're conscious, we're passing, the spotlight round, you don't want to take too long. Whereas if it was us, just like the four of me and the other Andys and a couple of other people, we would probably explore that. You'd get more time to explain why your character's doing something, but we don't so much. And I think something like that would be really interesting.
And also on that topic, I don't see, probably because of the production work it would take, but I don't know why actual plays don't do actual confessionals, like after the game's sort of cut, like film a bunch of what was going on for me in that moment, like you're saying internally, and just sort of splice them in. Now that's a lot of work for.
It's a huge amount of work. Especially because when you're on the schedule, like we're on a weekly schedule, like it takes enough time to get even the episode live. But one of our cast has started to do watch parties, and so that's, it's kind of like a DVD commentary, isn't it? And that's been quite good fun. And we have talked about, like, we'd quite like to go back and watch the whole thing and do some of that. Because quite often afterwards, like, we've got a Discord server where people chat about the episodes, and I'm like, no, that's not what my character was like. You've got that so wrong. Anyway, I've got more questions. I need to get back to you, Tanya. But you're giving us so many ideas. And maybe, I know you've brought some books, so maybe when we talk about this, you can show us some of the books, because it might
of course.
bring this in. So Roderick says, I know Solstice was based on that charming upbringing we experienced, and Mum chums on your experiencing of parenting. What other aspects of the real world are unexplored in games? And my addition, or explored already in other ones you've got with you?
Okay. So, what are the aspects of the real world unexplored in games? If I had that answer and I felt like I had a connection to it, I'd be out there designing them, and maybe I will someday. So, Roddy mentions Solstice, which is a folk horror game. So it's folk horror, but it doesn't have any supernatural element at all on purpose. But it isn't realistic because you're competing to be burned alive in a wicker man. Okay, so it's
okay.
Basically, you're all playing folks in their late teens, early 20s. So you've probably been going to those LARPs for a few years at this point. And the time of the rituals came, and you're expected to become the chosen to go inside the wicker man and burn, and you're expected to want that. And it's about that social pressure around that, and you're competing with others because you feel you have to, but do you really want to be doing it? So I don't think that's quite real. I think that's taking a real idea, a real sort of background, and taking.
Yeah, although I think there's an idea there. So I grew up a little bit further north to you. So I grew up in like Angus, and we used to go on holiday in Perthshire, like Loch Tummel and all of those kind of areas. And so like being like gripped by some kind of like, genuinely, me and my brother would be gripped by like a fear, just like of the mountains, of like the great grey man, of all of those like folk things that obviously weren't real, but they felt real. I definitely think there's something like compelling about that.
So I'm thinking, if we're looking at some other games as well, and we're looking at things very much in the sort of more realist sense, there's this by Mark Shepard, is A Loud Noise in a Quiet Place. And this is basically a story game about temporary hearing loss, which Mark's experienced and experiences, and is sometimes subject to. And so it tries to go through, it mechanizes and the sort of like how scenes unfold and what you're able to do in the scenes, to sort of simulate, I guess. This is an interesting thing that came up the other day in a chat I was having, is like, are these games, because they're trying to simulate the real world, they aren't what we'd call simulationist often. like when you say simulationism for a role play game, you're usually talking about something that's really crunchy and stat heavy.
Yeah.
But Mum Chums and this, they're zine-sized games, and it's more about the emotional realism and the sort of like situation you find yourself in. So that I think really gets to, like, who would have thought a game about temporary hearing loss would be in my hands?
Yeah.
And here it is, and is exquisitely playable, is really interesting, and yeah, I kind of feel like there's definitely space for like experiences we've had that have had emotional impact on us. There may be, and probably is, and maybe we find it, maybe we don't, a way to make that into a role play game, or to place that into a role play game. Maybe of a sort of bigger scope is Dog Eat Dog. This is a game about to read it off its cover, a game of imperialism and assimilation in the Pacific Islands. And this is about, while there's lots of games about like the physical effects of colonization, like that you might be playing folks trying to fight off a colonizing force, or you might be the colonizing force going into an area, what have you, whether you're doing that intentionally or just because it's part of the game. This deals with the sort of social effect of imperialism in an area. One player is playing the colonizing force, the colonial force, and the other players are playing different, like, characters that exemplify different parts of society. And there's rules that you have to follow. There's cultural traditions that are already in place. There's rules that are being imposed that you have to follow, that get added to and amended as it goes on. And there's a token exchange mechanic about when you have to sort of relent against your will, or when you have to try and act in a certain way to sort of fit in. And the brutal truth of the game is that the colonizing force could just do a big old violence at the start and win right off the bat if it wanted to, and if the players twigged that was happening. But often that's not what anyone wants to happen, and it's more about the slow change of slow and not so slow changing of society, and changing of norms, and imposition of a new way of living. So it's a really powerful game. Every time I've brought it to the table, I've had a long, deep thought about the experience and what it meant. And you can play it in it's sort of written in the sense of talking about it in the terms of the colonization of the Pacific Islands, but the game also gives sort of like, you could play superhero aliens coming to Earth, and Earth is being colonized by these superhero aliens, and you can play it in a far more light-hearted manner. But I kind of feel like even the times I've played it in a more fantastic setting, it's talked to an emotional reality that's interesting to explore and powerful to explore. Let's see what else I've got here. I'm going to do a whistle stop on a few historical games, because I think they're worth looking at. There's games that sort of deal with real world histories. And before I mentioned, Just a Little Loving, Ben mentions it. Yeah, I've actually got the script book for that over there. Yeah, it's I've never got to play in it because and I've not got to the position where I'd be running it. But yeah, really powerful stuff, as everyone can read on the screen. But yeah, some historical games I've got here are La Disbanda, which is about the sort of the Republican forces trying to flee from Malaga during the Spanish Civil War, before the fascist forces sort of attacked and killed them. We've got Grey Ranks, and these games are quite grim on the whole. Grey Ranks, which is about World War II Warsaw Ghetto, where you're playing effectively the members of the Scouting Association and the Girl Guides who got drafted in as actual scouts and messengers and couriers and all sorts of other tasks, and you're trying to get through that the horrible acts that were undertaken there. And finally, Red Carnations on a Black Grave, and this is where you play. Each player has 2 characters set in the Paris Commune, one of the first major experiments in socialism in Europe. And basically what happened was a large section of Paris was barricaded, turned into a commune, but eventually the commune was overrun, and most communards were murdered or sent to penal colonies. And in the game, it's no exception. One of your 2 characters will die, and one of them, it's a random draw of a card to find out what happens to them, and they might die or they might be sent away. They might survive, but how it changes them and how it changes everyone is quite a sort of like deep and important part of that game. I'd say for all 3 of these historically based games, I've got a few others here, but I don't want to just list off game. Is we are playing in a fictionalized version of that history. Much like I mentioned, Mum Chums is playing in a fictional. Even if you are a parent, you're playing a fictionalized version of being a mom. Just like if you watch a very realist drama, it's still a fiction. But I feel like they have an emotional truth to them, and that you can explore. Even with historic games, you're maybe exploring contemporary matters in some way. I felt like the games of Red Carnations on a Black Grave I've played, one of them especially was exceptionally queer and exploring sort of, without being very explicit about it all through the whole game, I felt like we were exploring a lot of contemporary queer matters and a lot of contemporary politics and what's going on in the world through that historic lens and through in that other sort of time period, and through our understandings of it and through what the game mechanics and game flow was allowing. And I kind of feel like all of those games deal with like the relationships and interconnectedness at play. And so using those and using games based in a real world setting to that end, I think has a power that maybe sometimes comes to us when we're playing fantasy and science fiction games, but maybe maybe they're purposefully a step removed sometimes.
Yeah, I think they are. So I'm just thinking about this in context of what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the US right now, kind of the unwinding of so many rights and just things that we'd started to take for granted almost. Like we didn't, one side was still fighting and the other side thought that there wasn't any fight to be had anymore. And it feels like, in a way, like playing a game and consciously being like, I'm not going to do escapism tonight. I'm going to play this game, and it's almost an act of resistance to be playing a game right now, which I never thought I would be saying, but that's kind of how it feels. Like some of the content, especially the one that Benjamin in the chat brought up, you know, we can see in America right now, you know, they're removing references to LGBTQ plus people. You know, they've changed a Stonewall, is it a mural or a statue? Like, they've literally changed it to remove the trans person that threw the first brick in the Stonewall riot. Like, they're changing history, and it's sort of beholden on all of us to, like, not stand for that, and to stand up and say, no, that's not how it was, that's not what happened, and actually, like, we'll remember.
These are the same forces who engineered the AIDS pandemic in a lot of ways. Like, we're talking about a game where you play it over a whole long weekend. It's a 5-day long game. You play it from during the daytime, you have break time and workshopping, and overnight you play the game. And it's an intense LARP, and it's basically these two cabins on New Year's Eve outside of New York. And one cabin is basically the gay cabin. It's all okay. It's everybody going out and having a party there. Another party cabin is I can't remember who's in it, but they've all got a connection. But and then it's about, but they know each other. They see each other there every year, and they get on. And it's about each night of the game is a year on.
Okay.
And so it starts just as the AIDS pandemic is starting. Year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it watches that sort of sweep of the years and what changes and what happens, and characters die in between those nights of play, and people get ill, and people have their views changed, and things are happening in the world that they get bad information about what's going on. And it can change those relationships. And it's when the forces that we're talking about now that are attacking, like using attacks on trans community, on trans people, and on queer people, and on the bodily autonomy of women at large, and they're using these issues to try and divide and split things up. These are the same forces that were at play then, trying to demonize gay and lesbian communities, calling them pedophiles, calling them child molesters. Like, lesbian teachers had it in the neck, I remember when I was young. Gay men had it in the neck when I was young. Bisexuals are the absolute devil. The whole work there is just been recycled today. And so it's interesting to play games that have that historic focus.
I agree.
And then
we have gone slightly over time, so as long as you're okay to just keep on going for a few more minutes, because I do have a few questions I wanted to get to.
Can I just briefly interject on this? It's fascinating. Do you know the theatre practitioner Augusto Boal? Have you heard of him?
Maybe not.
He did a style of theatre called forum theatre, or the theatre of the oppressed, and it's really interesting. It's like the parallels between that and those types of historical gaming. It's fascinating. But the idea behind that is, there's a play that is about some moment of oppression, often a historic one, but that there's like a facilitator, and at any point the audience can ask to pause the action and can either suggest a different way out, or can actually like tag in and become one of the. I can't remember the term they use, there's a word combining audience and actor, but basically the audience can replace one of the actors and take on and try and resolve things in a different way. And this seems like this is doing the same kind of function.
Yeah, very much playing in the same emotional space. So,
Yeah, I completely agree, Ben, that we do learn through play. And so games about resistance can be the start of learning to resist, absolutely. I feel like we've sort of answered this in reverse, but I'll just pop to it. Martinez, have to ask, how does your queer, anarchist, communist perspective influence your games design? Like, from what you've just said, it's like by writing games in which people who are queer, anarchist, and communist can exist.
Yeah, but also I feel like, remember when we were talking about identity early on and how that shifts in different places? I think talking about that and thinking about how that plays into our gameplay experience, and our games are a place where we can step outside our day-to-day lives, even if it's a game with a real focus like Mum Chums or any of the others I mentioned. We're still stepping outside our day-to-day life, and that allows us, it gives us permission to sort of to not follow the day-to-day routine, and to maybe build to help build the groundwork towards making an empathic connection with someone else that we might not have otherwise managed. And so those sort of those bedrocks for empathy to build are the same bedrock for building solidarity to act together. Not a false unity where I'm just like, we have to act together in the same way, but in by solidarity, I mean, I recognize what you're saying to me, I listen to what you're saying to me, and these are the ways I can meet you on this. These are the ways we can help one another and take things forward to make our world better together, or to help stave off some form of negative oppression or situation, and to, in a material sense, make things better together. And by themselves, the games, I don't think will do that. You won't play a game and then magically the world's better. But I think we're building the emotional connections and sort of it's one of many ways in which art can help instill a change of mind to it's sort of people engaging with it.
And also, I think kind of like in a meta sense, I feel like it's also informed the answer to this question, which is Martin asked, how can I get Mum Chums? Because the Kickstarter has just finished, or will be by the time the question is read. And I think I saw that you're releasing the digital content.
Yeah, I'll be releasing. The full game's already available. Or it will be in a couple hours once I pop it up in a demo form. I'm going to have the layout completely redone by Cinta Posadas, who's going to be doing the layout for this game. But there's also a chance to put in light pledges at the moment, so you can hop onto the Kickstarter.
I'll share the link. The link's in the chat, everyone, so do go. Andy Law has popped in a pledge just before we came on air, so please do go and support Tanya. I think it's been amazing to hear from you, Tanya. I can't believe we live in the same city, and like I've never like crossed paths with you before.
I'm down to Edinburgh Indie Gamers.
Yeah, I will. But like yeah, it's been so nice to hear from you.
Yeah, it must be true. We must have all been in the same room at the same time, at Compulsion or Tabletop or something. But
we have and at Chimera and a few other things.
Yeah, loads of times, but we've just like never properly met. So it's been great to meet you virtually. I hope we'll get to meet physically soon. Wish you all the best. It's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us. Thanks, as always, to all our patrons and everyone in the comments, the patrons who keep our streams ad-free, and everyone in the comments that really makes this a really fun and interesting interview process. So thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you both, and I hope to be on sometime in the future.
You will be very welcome to come back. We'd love to have you, not least because I've got a couple of questions that we didn't get to that we can ask another time.
Discord.
Yeah, until then, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again next week for another episode of Inside the Rookery. Until then, goodbye and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.